Can it run Crysis? For a decade now, this has been the go-to question for any new computer. Or old computer, or calculator, or pinball controller, or really anything at all, because it's more of a punchline than a serious question these days. But 10 years ago, whether or not something ran Crysis was a legit inquiry, and for good reason. Nothing ran Crysis. At least, nothing ran Crysis to its full potential. When it launched for Windows PCs on November 13th, 2007, Crytek's new game was an unparalleled juggernaut of graphical fidelity and forward-thinking tech. Under the hood was CryEngine 2, an engine that was uninterested in only being the most impressive in 2007. Nope, it sought to be the most impressive for years to come. Crysis was so hard to run that even the best graphics cards of its day were unable to smoothly play it maxed out. Your best case scenario was using something like the 768MB NVIDIA GeForce 8800 Ultra, which at the time was the fastest single card solution on the market and cost over $800 US. But even this beast could only crank out 7 frames per second on the very highest settings, and while it was one of the few that could get into the 20s at lower resolutions, several competing cards on the market couldn't even render enough frames to count. So when this game was new, there was no one playing it with all the bells and whistles and a decent frame rate, because it simply wasn't possible yet. Whether this was due to ballsily ambitious design, bad optimization, or a combination of both, the result was that Crysis was the go-to game for benchmarking purposes over the next several years, and anytime a new GPU came out, the question was inevitable. Can it run Crysis? But Crysis was more than just a glorified benchmark or a graphics snob tech demo. I mean, it was those things, no doubt, but it was also a shooter worth playing in its own right. I remember downloading the demo and being absolutely hooked from the beginning, because it felt like a spiritual successor to Crytek's previous game, Far Cry, just with way more detail, improved combat, and much more environmental interaction. Of course, it looked and ran like day old Dookie on my system, but due to the stealth meets action FPS gameplay and the infinitely variable physics sandbox, it was an intoxicating combo I couldn't resist. So when the full game was out, I was all too happy to grab a copy, free it from its cellophane prison, and pop the DVD into my Windows Vista rig, knowing all too well that I would not be able to fully enjoy all its features yet. Thankfully, today, it's no problem to run Crysis on even a half-decent PC, so for the rest of this video we'll be fulfilling my 2007 fantasies and be enjoying Crysis on a machine that can actually run Crysis. Crysis begins with logos, brand deals, animations, notices, copyrights, and finally a very green main menu. And before we do anything else, it is Crysis tradition to jump straight into the graphics options, because there are a lot of options to optionally optionate here, and this was built to use DirectX 9 for the most part. DirectX 10 was available, and it had some graphics options for that as long as you had Windows Vista. Or at least that was the idea, since it turned out you could activate a lot of the DirectX 10 features through tweaking some files and get many of the DX10 options in 9. They didn't all work perfectly, but they were there. Once you have all that sorted, it's time to get onto the game itself, and it comes in single-player and multiplayer flavors. And the multiplayer was there on launch at least. It has since been disabled after the GameSpy servers shut down some years ago. There are some fan patches for getting online multiplayer to work, since the publisher, Electronic Arts, never patched it, but good luck finding a match on a whim. You're probably going to have to wait around for a special event of some kind, or just get on a local network and play in classic LAN mode if you happen to know real people. We're just going to be sticking to single player for the most part in this video, though. The game really comes alive on the harder difficulty modes. I do recommend playing them, and it's rather fascinating what it does with the hardest one too, disabling not just the crosshair, but making the enemies speak their own native language and not English. After this, you get a pre-rendered but rather pointless intro, just a trailer for the game that you're seconds away from playing. I'm not really sure what the point of this is. After this, though, is a scene rendered in real time that is a little bit more useful, introducing you to the main characters, a U.S. Special Forces group known as the Raptor Team. How machismo. After this, you're literally tossed into the game world, where you play Nomad, also known as Military McBoring Soldier. He's not a silent protagonist, but he may as well be with how empty of a vessel he is. Anyway, due to some unknown interference, you lose control of your chute and miss the landing zone entirely, dropping you into the ocean, temporarily losing your powers so you can get reacquainted with them. And from here, you're given an effective but unusually dark tutorial. I don't mean that tonally, I mean like it's just dark, it's hard to see stuff. Crytek could have easily blown their wad from the very beginning if they chose to, but they didn't. Instead, choosing to reveal the true splendor of the environment and the lighting and everything until after you're familiar with the mechanics. Once you do get through all that though, you get the full daytime reveal, and wow, look at all the everything. This was mighty impressive back then. Honestly, it still looks pretty good, although it looked more like this when I first played it, and it was probably the same for many of you too. That's just how it was. Yeah, seeing this huge island set before you, it just seemed like anything was possible. But it's worth noting that Crysis is not an open world game, but more of a series of large instanced zones taking place across a huge map. You don't really run into invisible walls so much as you do creative ways to try and limit you from going outside the mission area one way or another. The story takes place on the fictional Lingshan Islands in the Pacific Ocean, which has been subjected to a hostile takeover by North Korean armed forces, compromising American archaeologists along the way. And that is why you, a group of US Special Elite Soldier dudes, are going there to try to evacuate them. That's the main mission at least, but along the way there's all sorts of side things that keep coming up, and the result is that you're going to be shooting a lot of dudes. Not to mention messing around with the environment. The level of physicality going on was pretty unprecedented at the time. You can pick up and interact with hundreds of objects that would otherwise just be static details, including bottles and fruits and animals, man. Yeah, you can pick up animals. Why not? Throw a chicken at a guy. It's not going to do anything, but you can do it. You can also use explosives to demolish buildings and vehicles in spectacular fashion, and cut foliage into little pieces using a spray of bullets, or punch down trees a couple years before Minecraft made that popular. Poplar. Or take the slow and more quiet route by going invisible with silenced weaponry. Yes, you're equipped with a nano suit which can augment your armor, strength, speed, and stealth. And you're presented with a wide range of weapons, including pistols, shotguns, rifles, machine guns, rocket launchers, remote explosives, Gauss guns, and even some sci-fi stuff, most of which have alternate fire modes of varying types. And each weapon can be customized on the fly with upgrades you loot off of enemies. Suppressors, sights, scopes, magazines, lighting options, sleep darts, grenade launchers, and more. You want a 10x sniper scope on a 12 gauge or a laser sight on a minigun? It's absurd, and it lets you do it, so why not? This leads to an arsenal that is constantly evolving, keeping the game feeling fresh. Combined with the suit abilities and the environment often falling apart around you in chaotic fashion, and each playthrough can feel quite unique. This combination of stuff was just so cool to me back then. I hadn't seen this kind of weapon customization, especially on the fly and not hidden away in some kind of menu. It just made the whole thing feel more organic, like it was constantly changing at any time due to random pickups. There are also quite a few vehicles to hop inside, many of which have their own set of weapons. You got things like boats and trucks, APCs and VTOLs, and just all sorts of things litter the map. And for some reason, everything has nitrous, even pickup trucks and boats, so I always just assumed the North Koreans hired Dominic Toretto to design their vehicles. Now, as for the story itself, well, slight spoiler alert, maybe? You probably gotta know this by now. It's aliens. It's always aliens in these kind of games. While there's plenty of crazy crap happening in the first half of the game due to the North Korean army, the latter half of the game is pretty much all aliens. Rather cold, squid-like aliens who gradually litter the island with more snow and tentacles than a Frosty the Snowman hentai. As to whether or not this all comes together effectively, well, I've seen it said that Crysis begins as a great game, then becomes a bad game, before finally turning into a good game by the end of the campaign, and you know what, I somewhat agree with that. When Crysis is at its best, you're sneaking through forests, scouting out enemy bases, and more or less role-playing as the Predator, executing a plan of assault with what feels like an infinite number of gameplay outcomes. But when Crysis is at its worst, you're on a far more linear path, blasting through swarms of soldiers with eagle vision and aliens with cheap attacks that just aren't satisfying to kill. Although I admit, being able to grab the smaller ones and just punching them into submission, that's pretty sweet, but yeah, other than that, they're just annoying. Then there are the zero gravity levels, which, I can take or leave. It's often confusing to navigate in this mode, and there's almost zero opportunity to use the tactics that you've learned up to this point. I guess that's kind of the purpose of an extraterrestrial vessel level, it's just there to mix things up, and it achieves that. And I remember being in awe of the awesome alien ship design back in 2007. This is just such a cool thing to explore, especially in such high detail. However, as back and forth as I go with the zero-G levels, the VTOL stuff after that, screw that completely. It's awkward to control with a mouse and keyboard especially, and your ship is made of aluminum foil or something, making for far too many sudden deaths and quick save spamming, especially when the random tornadoes show up alongside bundles of enemies taking random potshots. Still, despite it being a kind of an up and down experience, I think Crysis is lots of fun even 10 years later, at least in the levels where it gives you free rein to approach each situation how you want to by experimenting with tactics, physics, abilities, and customized weapons. Still kinda sucks that the protagonist is about as interesting as a bucket of sand. I'd rather play anyone else on the team. And it seems Crytek knew this because the next game in the series was Crysis Warhead in 2008, a standalone expansion pack where you played your teammate, Jason Statham, Psycho.
No mate, you're on ground support duty. We've got a KPA base to take out. What's the earliest DTA?
Psycho's story parallels that of Nomads in Crysis, which makes sense seeing as Psycho frequently went off to completely different parts of the island during that campaign. The single-player story here is about half as long as the original game's 12 or so hour campaign, but the new weapons, improvements to the AI, and a protagonist with an actual personality make it worth playing if you liked the main game. Also introduced with this was an extra disc called Crysis Wars, a standalone multiplayer version of Crysis Warhead with several new modes and balancing tweaks. Then, in October of 2011, several months after Crysis 2 was already out, they released Crysis for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, and it made sense seeing as they'd already made a console-friendly engine for Crysis 2, so they used the tech to bring over the original game. It was mighty impressive considering what they had to work with in terms of hardware, and they even took the chance to remove those crappy VTOL levels entirely because of the player backlash 4 years prior. And yeah, that's pretty much it for what I want to talk about in this video regarding the original Crysis a decade later. I would still heartily recommend giving Crysis a shot, especially on PC where it still looks and plays pretty nicely on a modern machine. Sure, it's no longer the cutting-edge graphical powerhouse it used to be, but that's fine. The gameplay still holds up for the most part, and its experience of stealthy action gameplay with a crazy interactive environment holds up pretty well. It's an engaging feeling of an open-world FPS without relying on open-world FPS tropes that we see so often nowadays, like obnoxious amounts of trite collectibles, radio towers, territory takeovers, arbitrary crafting, and randomly generated encounters to pad out the game length. That stuff isn't here, and it doesn't need to be, and it's better for it, I think. It's a scripted single-player shooter that plays it straight, while still providing a satisfying feeling of open-ended possibilities and player experimentation. And you can now get Crysis without that hellish secure ROM DRM that it originally came with that limited the installs to 5 and all that kind of junk, at least if you get it online through stores like GOG, which are of course DRM free. I'll provide an LGR affiliate link to buy it on GOG DRM free down below in the video description if you'd like to visit it that way. But even if not, then I hope you enjoyed this LGR retrospective, taking a look at Crysis a decade after the fact. Holy crap, I'm getting old. And if you want to continue to get old with me, then perhaps you'd like to see some of my other videos revisiting all sorts of things, new and old, and older and newer, and everything in between, because that's what I do. New videos every Monday and Friday, so thanks for sticking around if you do that, and as always, thank you very much for watching what you just did.